Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for attending this conference. I am Maria Astrid Rios Duran, professor at the National University of Colombia. I am speaking from Bogota, and I will be presenting The Chair and Photography, the history of chairs in Colombian photographs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During my research into A Visual History of Furniture in Colombia 1880 to 1950, Sitting in Tradition, Looking at Modernity, preliminary research of, and exploration into a possible future visual history of furniture in Colombia and Latin America in the 19th and 20th centuries, I discovered the chair could be a reference for furniture present in photographic records. The photos help us to understand the culture and history of material life in Colombia during this time period. With regard to photography, we must note that it constitutes a resource typical of the period under study. In Colombia, photography was introduced in the 19th century and fully came into its own in the first half of the 20th century. In the first 100 years of its existence in the country, beginning with the first photograph dated around 1840, we find the number of photographers growing, which, towards the end of the 19th century, totaled around 100. We observed a change in the type of photography, which went from business cards and postcards focused on portraiture to industrial, advertising, and journalistic photography for print media. With the advent of the latter, we see the documenting of political events, wars, and the growth of cities, such as Eduardo Serrano's exposition in the magnificent book History of Photography in Colombia. Interest in historiographical research of photography has only grown in the last 2 decades. Despite some movement in the 1980s, the most important of which is the book by Eduardo Serrano, it would not be until the first years of the new century that photography would begin to take off as a topic of research within history. This is evident through some texts such as the Daguerreotype in Colombia by Pilar Moreno de Angel, Photography and Society by Edward Goyeneche Gomez, and Eyewitness, Photography in Antioquia, 1848 to 1950, by Santiago Londoño Vélez. Likewise, more and more studies about the life and work of photographers such as Sadie Gonzalez, Meliton Rodriguez, and Saul Orduz are being published. Other authors have taken different approaches, such as focusing on modern architecture or the private life, and most recently, research related to cultural material, such as this paper now. In relation to the history of material culture, furniture, chairs in particular, and photography, the possibility that this type of image offers to teach us about these issues is remarkable, and especially in a country like Colombia, where there is no museum of design and material culture and where it is difficult to access private heritage collections. For example, through this research and a review of around 6,000 images from the period, we have built a visual body of approximately 800 images of chairs, within which we have recorded up to now at least 125 different types of chairs. However, it is important to note that the presence of furniture in these photographs is mainly fortuitous. The piece of furniture was noted because it was part of the scene that they had wanted to capture. This was the case at least until the 1940s, when we began to see a possible intention to record and showcase the furniture, and especially the chair, as part of modern domestic life and as a scene to be photographed. This was the case with the Colombian architecture magazine Proa, and as discussed in the article Exposed Chairs, Identification of International Style Furniture, the WOM, the BKF, the LCW, and images from the Colombian magazine Proa, 1946 to 1959, which showcase domestic life. Within the set of photographs studied, we find studio photography. These are photographs taken in the photographer's studio. The photographer recreated scenes that served as a background for the persons to be portrayed, as we can see in images 2. In this sense, the piece of furniture in this scene and in this particular image is coincidental. The furniture is not the main element of focus. It is one of the props of the created scene, which is why, on first view, some of the chairs may be considered to be studio chairs. This then suggests that the photo is not necessarily about chairs of everyday life. This does not, however, take away the relevance of these chairs, since they suggest the possibility of sitting as one of the daily practices of the time and culture. A slightly different case is a photo consisting of interior images and chairs that was published in the 1940s in the Colombian magazine Proa. The intention of documenting and advertising international-style furniture is obvious in some of the inclusions, as we can see in image 3. However, several of these images suggest studio furniture very much in the style of what was observed above. In other words, although different, the experience is close to that of the studio chairs because these interiors were intentionally composed with a type of furniture, and because there is also an intention on the part of the photographer to compose a scene, document it from certain angles, landscape, for example, for exhibition purposes of both furniture and modern domestic life. In summary, several of the chairs that make up the visual body of research could be considered studio chairs, chairs that were part of the props of the scene composed for photography, chairs that were of interest and of taste to the photographer or whoever commissioned the image, chairs from a photographic landscape, not necessarily chairs from everyday life. These chairs may be different from those found in interior and exterior scenes that were reproduced in the mass media and about which we have almost no reference in our research because we have not studied these images as of yet. The types of photography and themes captured expanded over time. This is how, in addition to the portrait and studio photographs, we find journalistic photographs, and through them, we find the chronicle of exteriors, cities, and the political life of the country, in which we also find chairs. And although, once again, the chair appeared in these images coincidentally, the possibility of finding chairs everywhere is striking. We find them in public and private spaces, and within these we have observed parks, offices, the interiors of government buildings, living rooms, bedrooms, dining rooms, corridors, and domestic corridors, as seen in image 4. Given the above, we could consider that through the presence of this humble furniture piece in a diversity of places, we witness the culture of sitting and different experiences of daily life. Sitting constitutes a way of being in modern daily life, of life at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, as evidenced in this type of photographic record. In the almost omnipresence of the chair, its diversity also draws attention. Despite not formally identifying the entire set of chairs rescued from these photographic records, it is possible to note their diversity, note some of the possible proper names, and recognize the traditional and modern nature of some of these pieces. The set of chairs is diverse. We have identified around 125 different chairs so far. Although it has been difficult to determine the style of each of them, progress has been made for some. For example, friar chairs, possibly Rococo chairs, Crownellian chairs, a period expression found in the press, perhaps alluding to Louis XIV and Louis XV style chairs, tonneau chairs, and tubular tilting chairs, as we see in image 5. This type of chair also allows us to talk about traditional furniture and modern furniture. The traditional is the furniture that evokes and comes from other eras, such as the colonial, the Baroque, and the beginning of the Republican period. The modern refers to styles such as the tonne and, more recently, the tubular. Another topic to highlight in this approach to photography and the chair is the diversity of subjects found within them. Throughout the visual body of work, we find people of different races, ages, genders, and socioeconomic conditions. Around the chair are men and women, children, adults, the elderly, Afro-descendants, peasants, poor and wealthy people. And although some of the chairs stand out for their simplicity and others for their opulence, we cannot say that the link between them and their users is direct, because, as was indicated at the beginning, some of these chairs correspond to studio chairs. Therefore, it is possible to assert that this type of studio chair could contribute in some way to the democratization of the use of the chair, and this applies especially to the Afro-descendant population and to cases like the one in image 7. According to Walter Benjamin, photography itself, due to its reproducibility, democratized access to the image, as well as to what is recorded in the image. In this regard, Maria Isabel Zapata cites, according to Benjamin, that, quote, technique makes everything available to man. It is more social, more collective, less individual, more egalitarian, unquote. These photographs brought the subjects and the objects closer and bring us closer to these subjects and their objects. Thus, photography is a bridge between people and things, before and now. Taking into account the objectives of the research, a visual body of photographs was created in which we found chairs. The results could not be more conclusive in terms of finding many and diverse chairs within them, as we have demonstrated above. Today, sitting down is a common and daily practice. However, at the time of this study, sitting down may have been in its infancy. Despite the dynamism of this period, we find that being still and sitting complemented that dynamism. Sitting in different places and carrying out different activities, such as at work, in the bull ring, in the craft workshop, in the office, in the industry, in a domestic gathering, etc. That is, sitting was involved in many activities, moments, and spaces. As life in the cities changed and new ways of modernity were established, the possibilities of sitting also increased. Being seated in a diversity of chairs of different styles and possibly of different prices according to the circumstances of its users. This is why we suggest that sitting in a chair became an established cultural practice for a time in Colombia. However, it is possible that this was a foreign practice that also connects us with the ways of being modern and being Western if we take into account appraisals such as those of Arnold Bauer, in which, for earlier times in Latin America, in humble and rural contexts, sitting took place on rustic rugs, among other ways, long before chairs arrived. Sitting in a chair was, then, an established practice of foreign origin. The importation of this type of object, as well as its local production, must have been contributory factors. In this regard, the way in which some of these chairs were reproduced locally is also striking, because they did so with forms of production different from those of the original piece, as happened with the tonne chair. We are able to show this well through image 9. This photograph could not be more surprising because it confirms the local production of this object, as well as the adaptations given for its elaboration. In this case, unlike the international benchmark, a tonne is being made by turning the wood and not by steam shaping, as was characteristic of the original tonne. This research has made evident the difficulty of talking about a traditional Colombian piece of furniture. Some pieces, although traditional because they came from earlier times, were in themselves foreign-style pieces, some of which were in turn the product of local manufacturing through traditional methods, as we have seen with the case of tonne. Without a doubt, the chair is a distinctive element of life at the end of the 19th and the first half of the 20th centuries in Colombia, and photographic evidence allows us to account for this. In Colombia, and at the time being researched, the Western cultural habit of sitting was adopted, or was in the process of its adoption. The chair, although sometimes a studio chair, is an element that allows us to confirm this practice of everyday life, an element through which different subjects in different spaces are related. Most of the time they are sitting on the object, and other times they only show the possession and use of it, a use that can transcend sitting to be only by their side, and to highlight it as an integrating element of the space. All serve as possibilities for what contributed to the forms of artisanal, industrial, and consumer production of this good that increased during this period. Thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to share this paper with you. I look forward to your comments and questions. Until next time.